The people of Dodge City never forgot the moment they saw Judge Mercer's young wife running barefoot at dawn. Catherine Mercer didn't run. She moved softly, carefully, like a woman always waiting for permission to exist. But that morning, her nightdress was torn, her hair tangled, and fear clung to her face like dust on a trail horse. She bolted across Front Street, stumbled once, then vanished into the tall summer grass stretching toward the Boone Ranch. Folks didn't say a word at first. They just stared. A woman only runs like that when the thing chasing her is something she cannot fight. Catherine Mercer was 22, quiet, polite, always wearing long sleeves even when heat shimmered off the roofs like hammered metal. She was married to Judge Nathaniel Mercer, a man more than twice her age who spoke of justice like it was a possession he kept tucked in his vest pocket. People respected him, though they never quite liked him. Still, he was the judge, and in Dodge City that was enough. The man she ran toward, however, was someone the town didn't trust at all. Elias Boone, 48, lived alone on a wide, sunburned stretch of Kansas prairie. Tall, rough-handed, hard as river stone on the outside, and quiet enough that you could mistake him for cold. He rode into town once or twice a month for supplies and left before anyone could trap him in a conversation. Folks whispered about him. They claimed they heard strange cries drifting across his land late at night, though most who said it had never been out that way after sunset. Months before, Catherine's horse had gone lame near his property. She'd been stranded, frightened, and embarrassed. Elias had simply knelt in the dust, fixed the shoe with steady hands, and stepped away like a man who expected nothing in return. His hands had been gentle. His eyes kind. She never forgot that. So when she ran that morning, ran toward his ranch, every onlooker felt a strange stir of unease. But none spoke it aloud. By noon, Judge Mercer burst into the street red-faced and shaking with fury. He shouted that Elias Boone had stolen his wife, dragged her off, done unspeakable things. He thundered that the rancher was a danger to every woman in the territory. And the town, hungry for a villain, believed him without asking a single question. Riders saddled up fast. Rifles were grabbed. Men muttered prayers and followed the trail leading toward Boone Ranch like hounds chasing a scent. But every person left behind replayed the same detail in their mind like a stone they couldn't ignore. Catherine Mercer hadn't been running away from Elias Boone. She had been running to him. Tracks were found near the river, deep hoof prints pressed into wet mud, a torn scrap of Catherine's blue nightdress snagged on a low branch. To the riders, it was proof she had been dragged. So they pressed on harder. Boone Ranch was unsettlingly quiet when they arrived. Too quiet. The men approached the barn with their rifles raised, hearts pounding at shadows they created in their own minds. Fear makes imagination louder than reason. They kicked the barn door open. Sunlight poured inside, and froze them where they stood. Catherine lay on an old cot, her skin slick with sweat, a blood-soaked bandage clinging to her side. The wound was deep, the kind born from falling hard against iron, not the kind inflicted by a knife. Her wrist bore rope burns, raw, red, and new. A table had been knocked over, tools scattered like the aftermath of a fight. Elias stood between her and the door, a knife in one hand and a strip of cloth in the other. His shirt was torn, a fresh scratch raking across his forearm. A small fire glowed beside a bowl of boiled water. To the riders, the scene confirmed everything they already believed. They didn't ask a single question. They tackled him, bound his wrists, dragged him out into the dust. Elias didn't spit or curse or struggle. He lifted his head once and said, steady and calm, "I did not take her. She ran here on her own." But fear drowned out truth long before he spoke it. Catherine was hauled back to town, limp and feverish. Elias was thrown into a cell behind the courthouse. People crowded the windows to stare at him, whispering every foul rumor they could invent. Not a soul asked why a man so feared had never harmed anyone in all his years. Then something unexpected began to happen. As Catherine drifted in and out of consciousness, she kept repeating one phrase through cracked lips. Not Elias, not him. Over and over, like a prayer no one wanted to understand. It wasn't until the doctor peeled back her sleeves that the truth fell open like a wound long hidden. Old bruises, faded and yellow, lay beneath fresh ones. Rope marks, older ones, ringed her wrists where skin had healed only to be rubbed raw again. Finger-shaped bruises marred her upper arms. Wounds like those didn't come from one frantic night in a barn. They came from a home. The doctor's face tightened. He stepped outside and quietly shared what he'd seen with the pastor and the general store owner. An old widow living across from the judge's handsome White House added her own whispered truth. She had often heard shouting from inside, had seen Catherine in the yard clutching her ribs like something inside had cracked. No one had listened to her before. They were beginning to listen now. When Catherine woke near sunset, she tried to sit but winced with pain. Judge Mercer told everyone she was confused, shaken, unable to speak sense. But her eyes, frightened and hollow, said otherwise. When the doctor gently asked who had hurt her, her answer made him drop his spectacles. She whispered the judge's name. The rope burns, she explained, came from tying herself to a post outside Elias's barn so she wouldn't wander into the prairie and die of fever. Elias had cut her loose, carried her inside, and tried to save her. The overturned table came from her thrashing when the fever overtook her. The scratch on his arm was her doing. He saved me, she whispered. And they will hang him for it. But outside, the crowd kept inventing uglier stories about Elias because rumor is easier to believe than truth. The next morning, Dodge City gathered for what they called a hearing, though it was nothing more than a spectacle. Elias was tied to a post in the center of the square like a criminal ready for display. Judge Mercer strutted out of the courthouse wearing his finest coat, milking the crowd's sympathy with every feigned limp. He claimed Elias had kidnapped, beaten, nearly killed his wife. He pointed to the rope burns on Catherine's wrists and shouted that they proved she had fought to escape. The crowd roared with approval. Elias simply said, "I would rather hang than hurt that girl." And then fell quiet. But the tide began to shift. The doctor's young apprentice sprinted into the square shouting that Catherine was awake and begging to speak. The judge's face whitened. They carried her out in a chair, pale and trembling. The whole crowd leaned closer, the way people do when they don't know what they're about to hear. Catherine lifted her head, found Elias tied to the post, and forced the words out. "He saved my life. I ran to him. I was not taken." She raised her wrist. "I tied myself. He cut me free. The table fell when I thrashed. The scratch on him came from me." Her voice broke. "Everything you think you saw was me trying to survive. And he helped me." The doctor repeated every word in a clear, steady voice. Then he added the part nobody wanted to hear. Her old wounds did not come from Boone Ranch. They came from her husband's home. Silence fell like a hammer. Judge Mercer lunged forward and grabbed her wrist, hard enough to make her cry out. That single movement, fierce, violent, unthinking, was all it took. The town saw the truth laid bare. Men stepped in, tearing his hand from her arm. He fought them like a wild animal, screaming that she owed him loyalty, screaming that a wife must obey, screaming that she lied. But the more he shouted, the more people stepped away from him. When Catherine reached weakly toward Elias and whispered for them to untie him, the doctor cut the ropes himself. Elias stood slowly, rubbing his raw wrists. He didn't look at the judge. His eyes were only on her. "You should have rested longer," he said softly. People saw the truth in that moment, saw the honesty in him and the terror in her. By nightfall, the judge sat in the same jail cell he had once thrown others into. Elias walked Catherine back to the doctor's office, steadying her with a hand at her back, careful as if she were made of glass. She leaned into him. Not like a woman desperate for protection, but like someone finally allowed to choose where she belonged. In the days that followed, the town tried to make things right. Catherine healed slowly, watching the hills from the doctor's window until she grew strong enough to walk to Elias's ranch. When she arrived, he stood on the porch as though he'd been expecting her. She told him she wasn't going back to the judge's house. She wanted a life that felt like her own. Elias didn't promise her happily ever after. He simply said she could stay if she wished. And she did. From then on, Dodge City whispered a different kind of story, one about a rancher blamed for darkness he didn't create and a young woman who ran toward the only man who had ever shown her kindness. A story about truth rising despite rumor, and about how the cries folks heard on the prairie were nothing more than coyotes and wind in dry grass. Maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes the world judges before it listens. Sometimes the loudest voice smothers the honest one. And sometimes strength is simply standing beside someone who deserves it. So tell me, if you'd been in Dodge City that summer, whose story would you have believed? Now, settle in with something warm to drink. Tell me, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from?